All right, so today we're going deep into a world that's pretty fascinating and maybe a little bit murky.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about Balakhilya Das,
Okay.
also known as Johnny Midget,
All right.
and his role in the Science of Identity Foundation, also called the Chaitanya Mission.
Okay.
And we've got a ton of sources here.
Wow.
Letters, forum, discussions, articles, even some social media posts.
Interesting.
Feels like we're putting a puzzle together,
Yeah.
trying to understand how this organization works
Right.
and where it fits in, with the whole world of Gaudiya Vaishnavism.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex picture for sure, especially since, some of this material has some pretty strong opinions,
Okay.
even allegations. But it's important to remember we're not here to take sides or judge.
Yeah,
Our goal is to help you understand what's going on.
Yeah, think of us as your guides
Exactly.
through this whole jungle of information. So for those who might not know,
Okay.
Balakhilya Das was actually initiated into ISKCon, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness,
Right.
by its founder, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada.
Okay.
But now he's a prominent figure in the Science of Identity Foundation,
Interesting.
which is led by Chris Butler, who's also known as Jagadguru Siddhaswarupananda Paramahamsa.
Okay.
And it's that shift that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Going from IFKCon to the Science of Identity Foundation.
Makes you wonder, what's that all about?
For sure.
To really get this shift, though, I think
Yeah.
we need to understand a little bit about Gaudiya Vaishnavism in general.
Okay.
It's a specific branch of Hinduism focused on the worship of Krishna and a lot of religious traditions. It's got all these different schools of thought and interpretations,
So where does the Science of Identity Foundation fit into all of this?
Right.
Is it just like another type of Gaudiya Vaishnavism?
Yeah.
Or is it something different?
That's the big question, isn't it? And
Yeah.
this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
So the Science of Identity Foundation definitely says it's rooted in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. But some of the sources we've got suggest there might be some big differences from traditional practices.
Like what?
Well, for example, we found this letter that claims Balakhilya Das warned followers not to hang out with other Gaudiya Vaishnava groups.
Really?
Said it would be super dangerous
Wow.
for their spiritual lives.
That's pretty intense.
Yeah, especially in a tradition that's all about unity and finding common ground.
It almost feels like there's this us versus them thing going on.
Yeah.
Which kind of goes against this idea of a world Vaishnava family.
Exactly.
That we see in some of these other sources.
Right. It makes you wonder, why do they need to be separate?
Yeah, what's the reason?
It really speaks to the power dynamics within the Science of Identity Foundation.
And how those might be different
Interesting.
from more traditional groups.
So we're seeing some red flags here.
Yeah.
Sounds like the Science of Identity Foundation might have a different set of rules.
Maybe.
But it goes beyond just warnings about other groups, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Some of the sources talk about some serious allegations against Balakhilya Das himself.
That's right.
We should definitely look into those.
We should.
For example, one source claims that even though he talks about selfless service, he's been accused of exploiting his followers financially.
Really?
And there's even talk that he was moving money around from international branches back to headquarters. And if we think about that in the context of traditional Gaudiya Vaishnavism, it's kind of strange.
It is.
Because renouncing material wealth is a big part of the tradition.
Totally.
So if there's any financial stuff going on, especially within the leadership, it makes you question if they're really following those traditional values. For sure.
This is getting complicated.
It is.
So to figure out what's really going on here,
Yeah.
I think we need to dig deeper into the Science of Identity Foundation itself,
I agree.
especially their practices and how they compare to Gaudiya Vaishnavism.
That's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, let's take a look at some of the key parts of Gaudiya Vaishnavism
Okay.
and then see how those match up
Right.
with what we're seeing in the Science of Identity Foundation.
I think that'll help us understand this story better.
I think so too.
All right, let's do it.
Awesome.
So in traditional Gaudiya Vaishnavism, one of the most important things is this idea of sannyasa.
Okay.
It's like the renounced order of life, dedicating yourself totally to spiritual stuff.
Right.
No worldly attachments.
Got it.
No material desires.
So like taking a vow of simplicity.
Exactly.
And just focusing on connecting with Krishna.
That's it. And traditionally, sannyasis.
The people who take these vows.
Yeah, they're supposed to live a really simple life.
Detached, serving the community as guides and teachers.
Okay.
They're not supposed to get involved in worldly things.
Like what?
Marriage, for example.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Or making a bunch of money.
Which brings us to one of the controversial things about the Science of Identity Foundation.
Uh-oh. What's that?
Chris Butler's marriage.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
To his disciple, Waylana.
Right.
And this goes against the whole idea of sannyasa.
It does for a lot of traditional Gaudiya Vaishnavas.
Yeah.
This would be a major no-no.
A big breach of those vows.
Definitely a departure from the norm.
And this isn't just some small thing, right?
No, not at all.
The guru sticking to sannyasa is a pretty big deal.
Absolutely.
In Gaudiya Vaishnavism.
It's central, really.
Like the guru is supposed to be this pure source of spiritual knowledge.
A guide.
Someone who's risen above all the worldly stuff.
Exactly.
So when a guru does something that goes against that, it can really shake things up.
Yeah, it can affect the disciples' faith and trust. It makes you think about what this means.
Yeah.
Not just for personal behavior,
right,
but also for how the teachings might be changing.
That's a good point.
To fit these deviations.
It makes you wonder about authority and how it works in a religious tradition.
Yeah, when a leader breaks the rules.
Right.
It can have a ripple effect.
Totally.
Maybe even change the whole belief system.
And we also came across some sources that talk about Chris Butler's lectures.
Oh, yeah.
They say some of the content was graphic.
Really?
And homophobic.
Wow.
And there are even claims that the organization tried to hide information about him.
That's concerning.
It is. It makes you wonder about transparency and freedom of thought in the Science of Identity Foundation.
Those are some serious accusations.
Yeah, and it raises questions about their values.
Right.
Gaudiya Vaishnavism is all about love and compassion.
Yeah, and respectful communication.
Exactly. So this doesn't really fit.
Plus, trying to control information? That sounds kind of cult-like.
Yeah, it does a little.
So we've got all this going on, breaking sannyasa vows, allegations about Chris Butler, and this potential suppression of information.
Yeah, it's not looking good.
But what about the money stuff?
Oh, right. We talked about that a little.
Yeah. But I think it's worth looking at more closely.
I agree. It's a big part of the story.
The financial practices of the Science of Identity Foundation.
Right, especially with that QNet thing.
Yeah, the multi-level marketing company.
That's another big controversy.
And again, it clashes with traditional Gaudiya Vaishnavism.
It does, because the focus is supposed to be on spiritual wealth.
Right, not material gain.
Exactly. Getting rich isn't the goal.
Yeah, the goal is spiritual liberation.
Right. So when you have an organization that claims to be all about spirituality, but is involved in a business like QNet.
Which has been accused of being a pyramid scheme.
Right, and exploiting people.
It raises some ethical red flags.
Definitely.
And some sources say Balakhilya Das was involved in QNet too.
Oh, wow.
Maybe even profiting from it.
That's a serious accusation.
Especially with the claims about him exploiting his followers.
It makes you wonder about their motivation.
Yeah. Are they really looking for spiritual growth?
Or is it something else?
Maybe they're mixing spiritual leadership with personal gain.
That's a lot to think about.
It is. And we should remember that these are just allegations and interpretations.
Right.
But even just considering them.
Yeah.
It's clear that there's tension between the Science of Identity Foundation and traditional Gaudiya Vaishnavism.
For sure, their practices don't really align.
And this tension makes you wonder about the people involved.
Exactly. How are they affected by all this?
So let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
And focus on the human side of things.
I'm interested to hear about that.
What kind of experiences are we seeing in the sources?
Yeah. Are people doing well in the Science of Identity Foundation?
Are they happy?
Or are there signs of problems?
That's where things get even trickier.
How so?
Well, we've got a mix of stories. Some people are super devoted and grateful, but others talk about betrayal and exploitation.
Wow.
Even psychological manipulation.
That's heavy.
Some sources mention former members feeling pressured to give a lot of money.
Really?
Or to work really long hours without proper pay.
That's not right.
And some people were told to put the organization's needs above their own well-being.
That's a red flag.
Definitely sounds like cult behavior.
It does.
And these kinds of experiences can really hurt people.
Yeah.
Financial hardship, emotional distress, even a loss of identity.
It's important to remember that all this stuff we're talking about,
Right.
the deviations, the beliefs,
Yeah.
it's not just theoretical.
It affects real people.
Exactly. These actions have real consequences.
It's easy to get lost in the philosophy and the doctrines.
Yeah.
But we can't forget about the human beings.
Right.
They're looking for meaning and connection.
And spiritual fulfillment.
So the question is the Science of Identity Foundation really providing that?
Good question.
Or are they creating an environment where people can be exploited and harmed?
That's for each listener to decide as they consider the evidence and the different viewpoints.
So where do we go from here?
That's a good question.
We've talked about Gaudiya Vaishnavism.
Yeah.
And the Science of Identity Foundation's controversial practices. And we've touched on the experiences of people who've been involved.
What are your final thoughts?
Well, I think it's important to remember
What's that?
that this deep dive is just the beginning.
Okay.
There's so much more to uncover about Balakhilya Das
Right.
and the Science of Identity Foundation.
And their connection to Gaudiya Vaishnavism?
Exactly.
Yeah.
These sources bring up a lot of questions.
They do.
And it's up to each person to keep researching, to think critically,
Yeah.
and to come to their own conclusions. Yeah, it's a lot to take in. You know, we've seen some big differences between traditional Gaudiya Vaishnavism and what's going on in the Science of Identity Foundation.
Yeah, sure.
But with all this controversy and these allegations,
Yeah.
one thing keeps coming back to me.
What's that?
The idea of questioning authority.
Oh, yeah.
Even in spiritual matters.
Right. You know, I think these sources really push us to think critically, not just accept everything we hear.
Yeah, especially with organizations like this.
Exactly.
They have a lot of power.
They do.
And influence over people.
It's a reminder that blind faith can be risky.
For sure.
Healthy skepticism is important.
Yeah, even in spirituality.
Absolutely.
And it's not just about questioning the leaders or the teachings.
It's about looking at ourselves, too.
Yeah.
Our own motivations.
Why are we drawn to certain groups?
Good question.
What are we really looking for?
Are we trying to grow spiritually?
Or is it something else?
Belonging, maybe.
Yeah.
Security.
It's a sense of purpose. The real docking way. It's a lot to think about. It is for our listener out there.
Yeah.
What would you say is the most important thing to remember from all of this?
That's a good question.
What's the one thing you hope they take away?
I think it's realizing that even in a tradition like Gaudiya Vaishnavism, with all its history and principles, there's room for different interpretations, different approaches.
And unfortunately,
deviations.
Yeah.
It's a reminder to be careful, do your research, and trust your gut.
Your intuition.
Yeah, when it comes to spiritual paths.
And organizations.
Well said. And for anyone who's interested in Gaudiya Vaishnavism or just the dynamics of religious groups in general, keep digging.
There's a ton of stuff out there.
Books, articles, documentaries.
And talk to people.
Yeah, people who've experienced it firsthand.
Exactly.
Remember the search for truth and meaning.
That's what it's all about.
It's a journey.
It is.
And we all do it in our own way.
Exactly. Be curious.
Be open-minded. But don't be afraid to question things.
To challenge what you think you know.
And make your own decisions.
Based on the evidence.
And your own wisdom.
I think that's a great place to wrap things up.
Yeah.
This deep dive has been eye-opening.
It has.
I hope it's got our listeners thinking.
Me too.
So until next time.
Yes.
Keep exploring. Keep questioning.
And keep diving deep.
Into this fascinating world.
Absolutely.